This is best friend of the show, Monica Cabina, artist and colorist on Batman: The Adventures Continue. And you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
Hey everybody, welcome to another bonus episode of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, and with me is my good friend, good brother, and the man that runs our Twitter account. It's Liam. Liam, welcome to another bonus episode with our coverage of Batman: The Adventures Continue, Season 2, Issue number 3.
That's right, and a lot going on with this month's issue. Of course, just last week we talked about our other currently running DCAU tie-in book, that being Justice League Infinity. And as you mentioned, Cal, thankfully, the books did not hit on the same week, so we were able to avoid having to record 3 episodes in 1 week last week. But here we are this week with an interesting issue to talk about. A lot of moving parts here as we introduce Batman: The Adventures Continue, Season 2, Issue 3, featuring Batgirl, the Huntress, and a returning villain from a much celebrated episode of the animated series.
That is right. We are covering this week's story, which is titled The Hunter or The Hunted. And we will be talking about that as we always do. And Liam, as you mentioned, this one actually, I liked it a lot because it was kind of a breath of fresh air. I feel like Alan Burnett and Paul Dini, the writers, of course, of this series, and they wrote the previous season also, which, by the way, if you're interested, if you have not heard our reviews of that, you can check those in the archives at DCAUreview.com or on your favorite podcast app or on the Pod Tower on YouTube. But I like that they have done something similar to what they did last season. And that is that they sort of took a break from telling a straight up Batman story. We had that story last season where we had Deathstroke make an appearance and Robin. It was sort of a Robin story that took over. Tim Drake Robin tale, sort of him with some Batgirl thrown in. A little Batman came in at the very end, but it was very heavily focused on Robin and Batgirl in those moments. So I like that this issue kind of takes a break from that, and that Batman in the beginning, we actually are introduced to Black Mask, who another one of those more popular, I guess, 90s or early 2000s Batman villains that never quite made the introduction into the DCAU. He had made appearances in previous tie-in comics, but had never made his way fully into the DCAU on screen, at least. So we get a Black Mask appearance, and Batman and Batgirl are sort of shaking him down, attempting to get information out of him. And as they're shaking him down, Black Mask sort of refuses to give up the information. And as you alluded to, that's where we're first revealed that Black Mask is holding this information over about the whereabouts of a Mr. Peak. And Batman explains to Batgirl, who seems to already have known, that this Mr. Peak was in fact speaking of Jimmy the Jazzman Peak, who from solicits and from the cover of the issue, we knew would be making his return appearance for this issue.
Yeah, that's right. That's, of course, a villain from the legendary Batman episode, I Am the Night, which you and I, Cal, have already reviewed, in fact, and you can find that in the archives, as you mentioned, where you can find all our past episodes. It's a pretty legendary tale of Batman sort of having a crisis of faith, a crisis of conscience, and that's sort of fully brought about by Jim Gordon being injured in the line of duty by this mobster, the Jazzman. And we talked at the time how there's even a little bit of foreshadowing of Barbara's future as she's in the episode, sort of sitting by her father's side in the hospital for most of it. And yeah, it was interesting to see that sort of pick up right where we left off. And it's sort of a chance to do it's the George Lucas, it's like poetry, they rhyme thing, where this is kind of her version of like Robin's Reckoning Part 2, right? It's her choice to her chance to confront the man. Obviously, Jim Gordon did not die, but it's obviously this deeply personal and painful memory of hers, and she is sort of now faced with having to confront him, and adding in the Huntress and some of these other elements, just making it more complicated.
Yeah. So as Batgirl sort of finds out that Batman is going after him, as you mentioned, it very much mirrors and is similar to that Robin's Reckoning storyline of Batman's forbidding her from being a part of it, that she's too close to it, that he's too dangerous. Obviously, this is one of Batman's more well-known almost failures, as Jim Gordon, as you mentioned, nearly succumbed to a bullet from the Jazzman. And it's interesting because we get a little bit more of a backstory, or at least character depth for the Jazzman, than I feel like we did in that episode. In that episode, he's just sort of known as like a run-of-the-mill Gotham gangster that just happens to almost get a lucky shot. Yeah, he's got this nickname, the Jazzman, but there's not a lot explained as to why that is or what that has to do with his personality. It's just sort of this moniker that they give him. But having it a little bit further explained, we learned that he has tattoos of different musical notes and musical bars tattooed on him from various songs. And he actually, before he kills a victim, he typically will whistle a specific tune or play a specific tune, and then in their memory sort of have that tattooed on him. Not all that different than sort of a Victor Zsasz in the comics, if you're familiar with that character, who will mark his body with a scar in order to sort of commemorate one of his murders. So it's similar vein, but I appreciated it. We kind of get that little bit of that backstory, but we send Batgirl on a journey as she's sort of retracing or trying to find the whereabouts of where the Jazzman might be, and heads to this nightclub and sort of grills this night performer who's there, who's in the nightclub playing the piano, and is a former accomplice of his, perhaps a love interest. And she mentions that she's not willing to give him up. But then once Batgirl sees that this girl Solo, who's playing the piano, has alludes to being hurt by the Jazzman, Barbara sort of appeals to that to her to say, hey, he actually hurt somebody very close to me as well, and my goal is to get to him before somebody else does. So at that point, Solo gives him up, and wouldn't you know, he's actually at a tattoo parlor in Gotham getting his latest tattoo done when he's interrupted by Batgirl. And we learn that Jazzman has some of his cronies on the way as well. But as they're on the way out, Batgirl's escorting him to her motorcycle, her Batcycle, and she's interrupted by a shot from what appears to be a crossbow. And wouldn't you know it, here we have the reintroduction here in the DCAU of the Huntress.
Yeah, so interestingly, and again, we don't do a lot of timeline theorizing on this show. We leave that to some of our other DCAU content creator friends, but there is a direct mention here that Huntress has worked with Batman in the Justice League, and that he is not a big fan of hers. So that would put this theoretically in the time of the last season of JLU,
right?
At the very least, if this is after she's already been fired from the league. Or, again, I think that's something that Alan Burnett and Paul Dini have talked about, that this was sort of, the idea was more to, hey, what if we had done another season of Batman rather than going on to Beyond? And so they weren't necessarily super concerned with a lot of specific continuities. So it was kind of funny here to see like such a direct line thrown to the Justice League series that will that connects it in kind of an interesting way, especially considering other things that have been said in this comic before, like how Tim's only been Robin for less than a year at this point,
right? And we know that there was another Robin in between there, all of that. So yeah, we're not gonna theorize. We actually had some people this week. We posted on Instagram, and lots of people asking us, oh, so where does this take place then? the answer is we don't know, and we don't know that the creators care. And in the end, we've talked about it many, many times before. It's fun to try and fit in, and I commend people, especially our friends at the Watchtower database, that obsess over that to a strong degree and break down what dates or when. But the reality is much like most of comic book history, things get rewritten all of the time. Things get thrown out of canon. Things get brought into canon. Things get explained away. You put these stories into 55 different writers' hands. Things are going to differ in the way that they decide to tell these stories. So for this purpose, we're told this is in the DCAU. This is the adventures continuing of Batman, but where this fits in the timeline is not. I couldn't tell you. It appears though that Batman has joined the Justice League and worked with them in this timeline for some period, and is at least aware of Huntress. So we learn that Huntress is out for revenge. She has a run-in with Batgirl where Batgirl is able to escape with the Jazzman, with Huntress in hot pursuit. They come hand to hand, and basically there's a couple of scenes of Batgirl running away with the Jazzman, stowing him away in a local train yard as she attempts to sort of fend off and plead and appeal to Huntress to allow her to take him in. In order for her to take him in to, basically not, she appeals to the idea that she doesn't want her just to kill him, and figures, she can do her best, as you alluded to it this week on our social media, her best impression of Batman appealing to Andrea at the end of Mask of the Phantasm.
Yeah, and I swear I'll let the timeline stuff go after this. But also, if you remember in the episode Double Date, which we have not reviewed yet, but I know that's one of your favorites, Cal.
Yeah.
It is said that Stephen Mandragora, the sort of albino kingpin character, killed Helena's parents, and a different scene of Helena's parents' death appears to happen in this issue. So again, we're playing pretty fast and loose with things. I don't think it hurts that much, and I'll just make a note that way back when they were doing Batman Beyond, Bruce Timm referred to the actual show, as a potential future for the Batman the Animated Series characters. So, if you want to just stick to what's on screen and what fits with that on-screen timeline and canon and whatever, that's totally fine. But as a story, I don't think that really negatively affects the story at all.
Nowadays, multiverses have never been hotter than they are right now.
Oh yeah.
I mean, they're everywhere. They're in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They're being introduced in the DC Cinematic Universe. We have all kinds of they're in the Spider-Verse. We've got all kinds of multiverses everywhere. So, if you want to explain this away as an alternate history or future of what could have happened, then whatever makes you have fun. There's actually a really cheap plug here for the guys at Watchtower Database, but they did a really great video just kind of talking about whether or not the first season of Batman the Adventures canon would fit the canon of the DCAU, and they came to the conclusion that it's like, it doesn't really matter. It's fun. Enjoy the comics. Stop trying to figure out so much about whether or not things fit or not. That's fun to do, but at the same time, you can rob yourself of a lot of enjoyment and just kind of enjoying the comic with trying to figure out, oh, that doesn't fit here, or why they do that. And yeah, that's frustrating. You love when things do all fit together, but you could also just as easily headcanon things away and come up with your own explanations, which I encourage you to do if this is causing you to kind of pull your hair out.
Yeah, I mean, if you followed mainline DC Comics, or as you mentioned, Cal, the TV shows or movies or anything, any comic books, yeah, the story changes and evolves, and as you said, different writers take on different characters, and then things get tweaked and changed a little bit, and you can decide that. And again, I'm not saying you're wrong to think that way. If you want everything to be super consistent and all fit together, I don't think you're wrong for thinking that way. But at the same time, I feel like we always try to come at this first and foremost of, is this a good story or not? is this a fun story or not? And then the timeline of the canon, while fun to tweak and to talk about and all that, it's definitely secondary. But getting off of that diatribe back to where we were. Yes, we were as Batgirl and the Jazzman are sort of hiding out at this train yard, and Batgirl sort of confronts the Huntress and is speaking with her and trying to get her to just stand down, as you said, and that leads to a sort of more direct confrontation. But before we can see who would win that fight, another classic thing that all comic fans like, which is to theorize who would win in fights between two superheroes. But they are interrupted by a couple of Jazzman's ex-associates, and one of them knows kung fu, to borrow the phrase from the Matrix.
Yes, luckily for him, and maybe unluckily for Batgirl, as they begin fighting. Also, the term cosplayer is used here, so I don't know when that word was invented, but it has to be after. It has to be sometime in the mid 2000s. So
for sure,
more timeline talk here, but yes. So Batgirl and Huntress must team up in order to defeat these henchmen, and do so pretty easily, all things considered. However, wouldn't you know it, that wily, sneaky Jazzman has managed to escape, and Batgirl actually handcuffed him to this handlebar inside one of the boxcars, which he's broken off and is now using as a weapon. And in the meantime, Batgirl has to be super sneaky, throws a batarang that causes the train car to change tracks, and nearly hit not only them but also the Huntress as well. Batgirl saves the Huntress, and Huntress declares that she owes Batgirl one, and pretty much is guaranteed to know what Batgirl is going to use that on. And Batgirl just pleads with her to allow her to take him in and not kill him, and to kind of let her do that for the evening. And then after that, she said, whatever happens to him happens. So she does take him in to custody with the police. But before then, Batman shows up. I guess he had been watching and keeping a close eye on the situation the entire time. So he must have ultimately, I guess, trusted her in the end, because he didn't intervene at any point, or he was sort of just watching from afar. And he was happy to be proven wrong, I guess, in this case. So they begin talking to the Jazzman, and the whole thing was the Jazzman had some dirt on Black Mask that he was holding, and that Batman was trying to shake him down for. And they find out that Jazzman actually had this bug on him that was hidden in plain sight, almost within one of his tattoos, and they quickly deduce that this is where he has all his information stored. So they find this, and at that point, the jig is up. The Jazzman has no more leverage. They throw him in his prison cell, and the officer escorting him to the prison reveals himself not to be Montoya, who maybe at first glance it looks like, but takes off their police uniform, and what did you know it? It's Huntress. Fade to black with a loud noise. Can we assume that this is the last that we'll see of Jimmy the Jazzman at this point?
Yeah, seems pretty concise and pretty definitive there. As yes, we get the dramatic sound effect. And yeah, it's that would seem to be the end of our issue there. That's definitely something you probably couldn't quite get away with. You definitely couldn't have had the sound effect anyway.
The thwack, yeah, maybe a fade to black. Yeah. And it's interesting. It's set up because as you mentioned, the killing of Huntress's parents, the Bertinellis was changed, and Jazzman was there playing a specific song as the family was being murdered, and she begins whistling this song. He recognizes the tune, and she mentioned earlier in the comic that she hated that song, and he mentions that it's one of his favorite songs. She said she's always hated it, and then that's when we get the interaction there where she appears to have offed Jimmy the Jazzman at this point. So she succumbed to vengeance anyway. So go figure. That the what will vengeance solve talk is over to it. I feel like.
Well, it's mostly interesting to me because I mean, it's like you said, Batgirl sort of mentions, whatever happens to him after tonight's not my business, or once we get this information on Black Mask, like I'm going to look the other way. But this, I mean, I assume Batman was also aware that Huntress was after him, and he also just let him walk into police custody relatively unguarded.
Yeah.
So felt like a lot of people were turning blind eyes to things for Huntress to complete the job here, which I'm not a fan of the I don't kill you, but I don't, or I won't kill you, but I don't have to save you line of thinking for the Bat characters.
Yeah.
But that is a line of thinking that certainly exists and in multiple mediums. So it's maybe a little bit of a differing opinion there on the idea of Batman or Batgirl or any other main Bat family member letting that go by and just kind of turning a blind eye to it. But that's where our story ends.
Yeah. So overall, like I said, I think it's a fun story. I do think that us being so familiar with Batman the Animated Series and such an iconic episode, as you mentioned, with Robin's Reckoning, that there are some elements, at least initially, that are borrowed from that. But maybe that's just cementing that idea of Batman being super extra cautious and not ever really trusting his sidekicks or his cohorts and being able to trust them completely. Although I guess he sort of does if he was sort of waiting in the wings, watching, observing with Batgirl or tracking her. So in a way, I guess maybe he trust but verified her there at the end there. I don't know, but I think overall, I think that's not a detriment to the story that they took something from such an iconic episode, because it's really not the main focus. It's not, is Batgirl going to be the one to kill, Jimmy the Jazzman? It doesn't feel like there's any threat of that potentially happening. It feels like she's bent on getting justice, but the type of justice that Batman believes in at this point. And really, is she going to be able to stop Huntress is sort of the tension for the entire issue is, what's going to happen? Is she going to be able to prevent Huntress from killing this guy before they're able to get the information out of him?
Yeah, that's it is a fun story element there of, and an interesting idea of, yes, how much does she believe in this code? How much of it is this really her code? Is it her following someone else's code, Batman's code in this case? And that sort of being put to the test where she has to defend the guy who almost killed her father from someone who wants to kill him and who has a justified reason for wanting him dead. Because not only, he didn't just injure her parents, he killed, or he was involved in their killing. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty striking, interesting idea, and it's interesting. They don't really play up that it's obviously they, other than the frustration that she expresses at sort of not being trusted by Batman and being kept out of the loop, we don't really get a lot of internal struggle where it seems she's considering letting Huntress take him out. So yeah, I mean, it is sort of, I guess, a reaffirming of Barbara and Batgirl's commitment to these ideals, at least up through when they can get the information to take down Black Mask. Yeah,
it's a good story. Like I said, I think the best part about it for me was it felt like it will hopefully make this whole run of this season give a little breather. It seems to be all encapsulated in one issue, so it's not, we're not spreading this out over multiple issues. It's a one-shot story that's self-contained, and then we're moving on to the next issue, which I believe the preview said the muscle flexes on Gotham. So we're not sure if the muscle is going to be the name of a villain, or is the muscle alluding to another villain? Is it going to be Bane? Or are we going to have, I don't think we've seen solicits have we seen solicits for next month?
Yeah, we have sort of a very quiet synopsis, a very not quite clear what exactly is going to be going on, but it mentioned the synopsis for issue 4 of season 2 mentions a body washing up on the shores of Gotham, and meanwhile Batman's on the hunt for a mysterious mercenary known as the Muscle, and that he's that apparently the story will also involve Renee Montoya. Speaking of which, so yeah, so I guess the Muscle will be some sort of new villain, or perhaps an old villain repackaged, as you mentioned, and what that means for the rest of the issue, and whether or not that itself will also be a standalone story, or if this will be the beginning of a second multi-part story. We'll certainly have to wait and see. But yeah, I definitely agree for this issue in question. I do think it was nice to kind of have just a one-off in the same way that even once the shows got into that more serialized style of certainly in Justice League and Justice League Unlimited, you would still have a one-off, where the Shining Knight and Vigilante have to fight a big monster in Metropolis or something, right? And not every episode was always, full force with whatever if and when they do introduce a sort of overarching villain for this season, like there was in season 1 of the comic, then it'll I think it's fine to have like a little bit of a break in between those first 2 issues focusing on the Court of Owls and whatever we get next.
There you go. Maybe this is a stab in the dark here, and maybe I'm way off, but maybe the Muscle, we see possibly the return of Jason Todd, or Deathstroke and Jason Todd teaming up.
There is a mention that a body washes up on shore, so
the intrigue. So we will know soon enough, but that will get us to transition, Liam, I think at this point, to talking about the artwork, which is usually what we also talk about when we break these down. And as we talked about actually last episode, we learned not too long ago that Ty Templeton, who has done all of the first season and the first 2 issues prior to this for this series, and he was diagnosed with cancer, and we are still praying for and rooting hard for Mr. Templeton's recovery. And we've seen a couple updates on his social media. We know that he's undergoing treatment, so we know that's a Herculean task in and of itself. So we definitely are still keeping him in our thoughts and prayers, and not only him, but his lovely family as well. So still rooting hard for him to get better, and then hopefully be around for a long time to make some more Batman comics. But first and foremost, taking on this battle first is number one. So with that, the creators at DC Comics went to the bullpen, so to speak, and went to another returning Batman tie-in comic, Batman the Animated Series tie-in comic artist, and really an artist that has worked on a lot of DC projects over the years, been involved with many things from not just DCAU comics, but including DCAU comics, Batman Beyond and Superman Adventures and Batman Adventures, both volumes of the Batman Adventures. He did some of the Batman and Harley Quinn tie-in comics, and so he's done a lot of that stuff, and a lot of stuff in main DC continuity also. So quite the veteran when it comes to doing both pencils, inks, colors. He's pretty much done it all from what I could see, and so he's no stranger to working in this DCAU style, which I think is why we were relatively excited when we heard that they were bringing him back. You can't replace a Ty Templeton. There's no replacing, arguably the best man to do the style of comics outside of maybe Bruce Timm himself. So, but having somebody that you're familiar with was certainly very exciting. And I think you have an interesting theory on maybe what may have happened with some of the artwork in this comic, because some of the artwork here looks a little rushed or unfinished in certain pages and certain panels when it comes to the drawings themselves.
Yeah, so when this issue was first solicited, and even when we first saw the cover with the lettering and everything, Mr. Templeton was credited as the artist on that book, was solicited to be the artist on this issue. Now, obviously, as we've just talked about, he had a health issue that caused him to step away. And as far as we can tell in the credits here, Rick Burchett is solely credited as the artist, along with, of course, best friend of the show, Monica Cubino, on colors. So I don't know if there was anything was already finished by Mr. Templeton, layouts or pencils or anything, or if this was completely from scratch. But I do think, and I feel like it shows in certain panels, that this seemed like it was a pretty quick turnaround, and I think that shows there's just certain faces, either of back or of particularly the Jazzman is a little bit, I think, inconsistent as far as like his proportions and the shape of his head and his eyes and things like that just made me feel like maybe this isn't finished. And some of it even almost looks like, either it wasn't, I don't know, maybe it just didn't go under the normal process as far as inking goes. Like it looked a little bit like I feel like you see more like jagged edges around, especially around like Batgirl's face in certain moments that you just generally don't see, at least that we're not accustomed to it in this particular comic or other DCAU comics. And again, we're not looking to be too harsh here, especially with the quick turnaround. But it did just feel like this was either, a little bit unfinished or a little bit rushed in certain ways here.
And as you said, when we look at season 1, they had, we had, talks with Monica. I don't know how many times it happened. It was a digital first release schedule. So they would release it first on digital. And if there were things that needed to be changed, I can remember several times where there were revisions made where, Monica submitted, changes to different colors, or, there's updates. And, I think it was mostly colors that changed in those in most of those updates. But with the digital first option, it kind of gives you a chance before you're able to release it or have to release it in physical form and get it printed to do revisions and changes. And I can imagine, while it's not, it's not that it's any less strenuous or difficult to draw for a digital first print that comes out 2 weeks or, sometimes a month before your actual physical copy. It does give you a little bit, I would hope, a little bit of leeway to kind of go in and correct some things if things fall by the wayside or, or overlooked in certain areas. So this season, they decided not to do that. And so every single issue comes out in both digital form and in physical form on the same day. We're getting full issues released here. And as you said, it makes logical sense that this was not a shock or surprise, but maybe a last second call. And I remember Mr. Templeton said in his post that, some of his work, had been delayed, or he was having trouble meeting some deadlines, I think he said. And then, that's when he kind of broke the news about the cancer and stuff like that. So, it could have very well been that this was an executive decision. I would hope not. I would hope that they didn't make the executive decision here, but, perhaps the artist came, the comic book runners the executives came to him and said, hey, we got to make a change here because we need to get this stuff out. And in which case the deadline sort of took precedence over actually getting the best possible work out there. So I don't know. That's all a narrative that, we aren't privy to, but it's, as you said, it certainly seems that there's several panels in here that at first glance, you're like, oh, okay. And then you're like, if you look really closely at them, as you mentioned, it looks like that they didn't fully finish the inking process, or it could also be, we were looking before we went on the air, and we were trying to do some comparison between Mr. Burchett's work from Batman Gotham Adventures and Batman Adventures Volume 2, and that stuff was generally pretty smooth and streamlined. And while it is not a one-to-one Ty Templeton art style, it is Rick Burchett's has a little bit more of an angular style, I think he does, and things tend to be a little bit more exaggerated and angular and a little bit off kilter with the way that he draws, but not everything seemed to be so jagged and unfinished. And I think unfortunately there's a lot of that, or several examples of that from this issue, which kind of let me down a little bit as far as, you know, the artwork to match a story that was actually pretty decent.
Yeah, and it's certainly, it's very noticeable, and I think especially because I first read this digitally, where you're able to kind of zoom in on specific panels and all that stuff, and I feel like you maybe notice it more. And you know, before I picked up my print copies from my local comic book store this week, but yeah, I don't think it's not a panel, and I think some of the more action heavy moments are pretty fun. There's a moment where Batgirl sort of, you know, takes some gas pellets out of her belt, and it's sort of a nice 3-panel sequence there where you see her fingers go towards her belt, and then you see the little pellets dropping out and hitting the ground, and then it sort of cuts to the wider frame of her and the Jazzman kind of, you know, escape smoke as Huntress tries to fire on her. And like, I think there's still some fun and cool visuals. And of course, you know, Monica's colors, I think, are still very much on point here. But yeah, I definitely think it's, especially if you're looking at the digital version where you're able to really zoom in on stuff, I think that does make, maybe it enhances some of those you know, those certain rushed panels or certain errors or you know, what have you.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, I again, we're not looking to trash this. And it's certainly not a detriment. You know, doesn't make the comic at all unenjoyable. There's certainly, as you mentioned, there's several different scenes that I think the scene where we actually get the recap of the Bertinellis being murdered. There's a great shot of the Jazzman sitting at the piano, and we have the shadow of the families being murdered in the background, and we have the musical notes overlaying it. I thought that was a great shot. I think some of the action shots when Huntress and Batgirl have to team up to take out these two thugs, you know, I think those shots are pretty classic. Felt very Batman Gotham Adventures. It felt very, very comfortable, very familiar. It felt like as the comic went on and towards the end of the issue itself, I felt like things really hit their stride for Mr. Burchett. I think his pencils looked a little more smooth. Things looked very well inked. Batman, and I think you mentioned before we went on the air, but you know, it's certainly darker towards that. So you know, it could be the expert inking from best friend of the show, Monica, or colors from the expert colors from best friend of the show, Monica, did some camouflage there. Some, you know, it was a little easier to cover up some of those things. But I think things towards the end of the comic actually end up looking a little bit more smooth, a little bit more well done, a little bit more true than some of those kind of earlier panels. I think it's almost when we get from the nightclub scene on where Batgirl's with Solo, I think that kind of kicks things off where things kind of start coming together. There's one or two more brief panels where you're like, I don't know about this, but generally speaking, after that, it seems to really, you know, he seemed to really hit his stride for a lot of stuff. So, yeah, I think there are some good visuals. Nothing that blew me away in comparison to what we had seen maybe in prior issues with Court of Owls, but I think also we'd be remiss not to mention our cover artist, Miss Stephanie Pepper, who did it's a tremendous,
awesome.
That's the standard cover, I believe, is the cover by Stephanie Pepper, and it's that features the Jazzman himself in Batgirl sidecar, and you get this purple hue, and you know, I'm not sure if Miss Pepper was giving a straight homage or nod to the classic 66 Batgirl purple costume, or maybe even the new Batgirl of Burnside purple costume. But either way, the purplish hue not only fits Huntress for her color scheme, but also fits Batgirl very well. if you blink and you miss it, or if you're not paying attention, sort of Batman cameo in the back that looks straight out of the Batman, the animated series original credits, opening credits. And, I think the reflection off of the bike too is what also is pretty impressive. If you look at it, the cityscape and the lights kind of reflecting off of the motorcycle, but just a beautiful, beautiful cover there.
Yeah, no, totally. I think that's one of my favorite covers, I think, from either season so far. It's so striking, and it, kind of combines the elements of the story in an exciting way that even if we weren't doing this podcast, I would pick this up and look at it, and even if we weren't such DCAU fanatics, I think this one would have caught my eye either way. But yeah, I mean, like I said, and despite some of those negatives that we talked about, I think a lot of the action and the fight scenes, especially towards the end, where she's fighting the Jazzman's cronies, and then when the train comes crashing to and there's you get the explosions, and there's sort of this montage of Batgirl beating up the Jazzman. I think that's a pretty fun bit, and you got the oranges of the fire from the explosions and all of that. I think that's a pretty fun sequence there. And we'll mention the letterer on this, I believe, is Andrew Marino, and the letters, when you see a sound effect word, that's his work. That's his work, and I think there's some good work by him in this issue as well. So I think overall, while this maybe isn't my favorite issue from an art standpoint so far in the series, I still think there's some pretty fun things. And I should say, actually, Andrew Marino is the editor of the book. Josh Reed is the letterer here. But yeah, I think there's some fun stuff in to be had here, even if this isn't maybe it isn't our favorite issue from an art standpoint, but still a lot of great stuff from both Mr. Burchett and of course Monica. Absolutely best friend of the show. So shout out to her also, as she always does, getting us our comp copies of the book, keeping your collection of each of the covers growing as we go along. Right.
So, shout out to her for just being the kindest, nicest person ever. All right, Liam. Absolutely. Well, that will wrap us up for this week. Thank you, everybody, for checking this bonus episode out. Don't forget, our standard episode will drop tomorrow. If you're listening to this on Friday, you will hear that tomorrow. We're in a month of Batman Beyond reviews, so you'll want to check that out, as we actually are covering the episode that introduces Zeta to the DCAUs. So lots of fun stuff to discuss there. Don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. As we mentioned, our entire archives are available at DCAUreview.com and streaming on your favorite podcast app. We would love it if you give us a 5-star review, if your podcast app allows you to do so. That helps us out a lot. Don't forget also subscribe to us on the Pod Tower on YouTube. Just search Pod Tower on YouTube. Give us a subscribe there. Not only will you get our coverage of all things DCAU, including not only this Batman, The Adventures Continue comic series, but we're also reviewing the Justice League Infinity comic series that is going on at the same time. That is a follow-up or sequel to the Justice League Unlimited, being written by James Tucker and J.M. DeMatteis. So lots of DCAU content there from us, but also some great stuff happening from the Tim Talk fellas, as well as Watchtower Database as well. So you can catch all kinds of content coming there. Liam, it's been a great time here, and I'm glad we were able to break this down. I can't wait to do this again next month.
Absolutely. Hopefully on separate weeks again.
Crossing our fingers here that the powers that be at Warner Brothers help us out and hook us up with that. But regardless, until then, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we'll talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Adios.